Hello, my AP US history students. I hope everybody is doing well and feeling fine here on a Thursday afternoon. Please don't be upset with me, but as I announced in class, we're going to have a quiz on Monday, which really breaks up about the first third of Unit 7. Unit 7 is a bear, so trying to divide it up is probably our best course of action. So your quiz will cover from the populists and the progressives all the way to the end of World War I. Let me take you through what I need you to know. So, we'll start out with the Populist Party. I know that was at the end of Unit 6 and the Muckrakers as well at the end of Unit 6, but they do factor into Unit 7 because they are catalysts for the progressive movement. Again, being informed and having the Muckrakers, bring to light certain issues in the country is what then progressives can work on towards making things better for the entirety of the country, especially for our middle and poorer classes. The populists are different from the progressives. The populists are mostly farmers that are working for better treatment of farming. People do mix them up quite a bit, but the progressives are really the one that is trying to use government action to create positive change for our middle and poorer classes. Looking at our progressive presidents, we've got Teddy Roosevelt, we got William Howard Taft, and we have, as we've mentioned before, the viciously racist Woodrow Wilson. During their presidencies, we do see more advancements for the common man, specifically in political participation. During these time periods, we will have the 17th Amendment, which allows people to vote directly for their senators. We will also have primary elections becoming popular, where people have a voice in who their candidates are going to be. We have the 19th Amendment, which finally, after this entire class, gives women the right to vote that they have deserved for the entirety of the country, but that is now formal. And along with women getting the right to vote, we also see prohibition taking into effect, where alcohol is going to be banned for about a 10-year period in American history. We also see progressive actions through the government breaking apart the big businesses. We see this with Teddy Roosevelt and trust busting. He uses the Sherman Antitrust Act, which had previously been used against unions. He combines that with the Clayton Antitrust Act, and they start breaking apart the big unions. Our big court case is Northern Securities, which is a railroad company owned by Cornelius Vanderbilt that is going to get broken up into smaller and smaller railroad companies, creating competition, lowering prices, overall benefiting the middle and poorer classes. We also have Teddy Roosevelt's square deal, where he has his 3 C's, which you definitely need to know the 3 C's and give me a specific piece of evidence as to how the government goes about enforcing them. So the first C is control of corporations. We see that with the Clayton and Sherman Antitrust Act, which breaks up businesses. We also see consumer protection, which is the second C, which is supported by the Food and Drug Administration, or the Pure Food and Drug Act. Connect that with Upton Sinclair and the Jungle, and you're beautiful. And then lastly, we have conservationism, which is the idea of protecting the environment. We can see this through the establishment of the National Parks and the Antiquities Act. So that is the square deal for Americans. So that sort of wraps up our progressives and the things you do need to know about them. There is something else going on in this time period. It's called imperialism. Imperialism is the process by which the United States is going to collect land outside of our country's borders. As we had already established, the U.S. is starting to rise as a world power. Other countries in the world, specifically the European countries, are colonizing parts of Africa at this point, and the U.S. is joining in. We start way earlier on with purchasing Alaska, which is going to stretch out our borders. But we also win the Spanish-American War, blame the Maine on Spain, in which we take over Puerto Rico, the Philippines, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and sort of have that weird relationship with Cuba where we own them, but they still have autonomy. It's called the Platt Amendment. Look it up. Basically, Cuba's our puppet, even though we don't technically own them. Anyways, the U.S. is going to look to control these different groups. We have arguments for imperialism, which says that the U.S. can benefit in terms of land and resources in this. We also see the argument for imperialism in that the U.S. does not have a frontier anymore, and conquering land outside of the country will be beneficial to our culture. We also have the argument that the U.S. is a rising superpower, and other superpowers in the world, we're not a superpower until 1945, nuclear bomb. Other powers in the world are doing the same thing. So if we want to keep pace with these other powers, we need to do this. This can also be seen through the Roosevelt corollary, where Teddy Roosevelt is going to have an addition to the Monroe Doctrine, which says that we can control the Western Hemisphere and also, basically spread democracy and capitalism to Central and South America. This leads to the establishment of the Panama Canal, which is going to make the United States incredibly wealthy to control all of Western Hemisphere trade. We saw the map where you can essentially cut basically a third of the journey off of going around South America off by going through Panama. How do we do that? We start a revolution in Panama against their controlling country. Once that revolution is won, the now Panamanian government sides with the United States. So we did incite a revolution to gain that territory and create the Panama Canal as well. Last argument for imperialism is that, again, that same thing, that we think that we should be spreading our culture, our democracy, and capitalism around the world. Anti-imperialist arguments, we've seen the political cartoons for this. America already had a troubled relationship with its immigrant populations, and anti-imperialists would argue that there is now more people to take care of, more cultures that you're going to need to assimilate to white American culture. That is their argument, not mine, obviously. And this would be a detriment. We also see arguments from Mark Twain and Andrew Carnegie, who both argue that we should be self-determining. We should allow countries to determine for themselves. If the United States believes that we should be, we are the government of the people, for the people, by the people, that whole thing, we, the people of the United States, other countries should also be able to decide what type of governments they want to have. That would also be an anti-imperialist argument. The last anti-imperialist argument is that it does take a large military that you're going to have to pay for to keep, those countries that we've taken under control. That leads us all into World War I, where the United States gets involved in the First World War. We are this rising global power. We're eventually going to have to probably get involved to settle the difference between the Germans, the French, the UK, and the Russians. Basically, the German U-boat activity, the sinking of the Lusitania, sinking of and attacks on American shipping vessels is going to be our number one cause. So it's easy to argue that the U.S. was already involved in this war, especially according to the Germans, because the United States was trading with the UK and France, sending them, guns and bullets and whatever else they needed for war, and profiting off of it. So according to Germany, we were already involved in the war, and they thought attacking our shipping was fair game, essentially. That combined with the Zimmerman telegram, Germans writing a message to the Mexican government, telling them that if Mexico starts a war with the U.S., Germany will reward them with, California, New Mexico, and Arizona back. That definitely contributes to anti-German beliefs in the U.S. and leads to some more support for the war. We also, again, have this idea, especially when Russia falls to communism in the middle of the First World War and pulls out of the war, that it is the U.S.'s responsibility to not allow communism to rise in other countries, which, again, leads to a Red Scare at home in the Palmer raids, where we're going to limit civil liberties at home during World War I. So that's basically why we get involved. Again, the last bit, we sort of are aligned with the UK and France. We've given them a loan. We're selling them stuff. So if we're going to enter the war, that's what we're going to do. And the U.S. does enter the war about 18 months before the conclusion, and then was fighting with their doughboys, their young men, in Europe for about 8 months or so. It's not very long that the U.S. is actually there. There are some major effects of the First World War, which you can check out my other video and the sheet we just did, but just quick, real big highlights. More control of the economy by the U.S. government. We can see that in the energy industry. More suppression of civil liberties. We see that with the Sedition Act, and then Schenck versus the U.S., which is one of the Supreme Court cases you need to know, where it does limit free speech. We see that in the Palmer raids and the anti-communist attitudes in the first Red Scare. Those are all at-home effects. We also then have foreign effects, because the U.S. is going to essentially decide post-World War I policies at the Treaty of Versailles. Again, Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, the one that are very idealistic for the establishment of a new world order. Article 10 of the 14 points is the one you need to know. That is where the U.S. is going to, try to create a League of Nations that we do not end up joining. We don't join the League of Nations because our Senate feels that we've been an isolationist country for our entire history, and we should not now be involved in European affairs. So like that pendulum we talked about in class, where the U.S. for most of its country is an isolated country, then we intervene. In World War I, we already have a military because we were developing that for imperialism. Post-World War I, we go back to an isolated country. We take apart our military and swing back to an isolated, and we won't become interventionalists again until World War II, where we keep being an interventionalist country for the rest of our country's history. So if I missed a couple things, go through your notes, go through the other videos I posted, go through the slides, go through your homework packets to check all this out. Pretty sure that was a good recap of everything that I'm going to ask about. You also have Heimler videos if you need it. You can email me, and I will see you on Monday for your quiz. Peace out, Cub Scouts. Enjoy the rest of the day. You're smart kids. Make smart decisions.